She stood in the middle of that grand ballroom, 8 months pregnant, dressed in a simple navy gown that stretched across her swollen belly, and she smiled. Not because she was happy. Not because the chandeliers above her head cost more than most people's cars. Not because the champagne flowed freely and the music drifted through the air like something out of a dream. She smiled because she had trained herself to smile. Because for the past 2 years, smiling had become the armor she wore every single day, but the armor was cracking tonight around her. 300 of the most powerful people in the city moved through the room like a tide. Tech executives in tailored suits, socialites draped in diamonds, photographers angling for the perfect shot near the ice sculpture in the corner. The annual Sterling Dynamics Gala was the event of the year, and everyone knew it. Names that appeared in Forbes articles mingled with venture capitalists who wrote checks the size of small countries' budgets. This was the room where careers were made and fortunes were sealed with a handshake and a glass of aged whiskey. And right there, in the middle of all of it, Maya Chen stood absolutely alone. She felt the shift in the air before she heard the words. That particular stillness that falls over a room right before something terrible happens, like the second before a storm breaks. She turned her head slowly, following the sound of her husband's voice, and what she saw made her breath catch. Somewhere deep in her chest, Daniel was standing near the center bar, surrounded by a small crowd of his colleagues. His jacket was perfectly pressed, his hair was immaculate, and he was laughing that confident, rolling laugh she used to find charming while the woman beside him pressed her hand against his arm. That woman was Sarah Whitmore, his assistant, the woman whose name had appeared in his phone more times in the last 3 months than any contact had a right to, but it was not Sarah's hand on Daniel's arm that froze Maya in place. It was what Daniel said next. He was speaking loudly, that kind of loud that meant he wanted to be heard, that it was deliberate, calculated, performative, and his voice carried across the murmur of the crowd like a blade through silk. "Oh, she insisted on coming," he said, gesturing vaguely in Maya's direction without even looking at her. "What could I do? You know how hormonal they get." He paused for effect, and a ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the small group. "Honestly, I told her she'd be better off staying home. I mean, look at her, she looks like she swallowed a watermelon. Not exactly the image I need projecting at the company's biggest night of the year." The laughter that followed was not kind, and Maya heard every single word. She stood there, one hand resting instinctively on the curve of her belly on the child inside her, the little girl who kicked against her ribs every morning as if from her that she was still there, still fighting, still with everything, and she felt the blood drain from her face. Around her she could see people glancing her way. As Eva paused mid, a woman in a red dress turned slowly, met Maya's eyes, and looked away with the particular embarrassment of a witness to something they know they should not have seen. This was the moment Maya had been dreading for months. No, if she was honest with herself, this was the moment she had been enduring for 2 years. She just never thought it would happen in her room, full of 300 people. She straightened her spine. She kept her hand on her belly. And she smiled. Because that was what Maya Chen did. She endured, she survived, and she waited. What she could not have known, what none of them could have known, except for one man standing very quietly at the far end of the room, was that tonight was not going to end the way Daniel Harrington expected. Tonight, the entire world was going to shift, and it was going to start with a bow. To understand what happened that night at the Sterling Dynamics Gala, you have to go back. You have to understand who Maya was before she became Daniel Harrington's wife. Before she became the woman in the navy dress that everyone pitied and nobody helped. Before she learned to make herself smaller and quieter and less, because Maya Chen was not always small. She was never, actually, truly small. She just became very good at pretending to be. Maya grew up in a modest apartment in the eastern part of the city, the only child of a brilliant, quiet man named James Chen. Her father was a software engineer, not the kind who got rich or famous, but the kind who was absolutely extraordinary at what he did and cared nothing for recognition. He worked long hours and came home smelling like coffee and dry erase markers. And every night after dinner he would sit beside Maya at the kitchen table and teach her things that her school wouldn't cover for years. He taught her to code when she was 7 years old. He taught her to think in systems, to see patterns where others saw chaos, to build solutions from nothing but logic and imagination. "The world is full of problems, little bird," he used to tell her, calling her by the nickname that stuck like sunlight. "The only people who matter are the ones who try to fix them." James Chen died of a heart attack when Maya was 19. She was in her first year of computer science at the university, and she nearly quit after he was gone. The apartment was too quiet. The kitchen table felt like a wound. But she remembered what he said, and she went back, and she worked harder than she ever had. As if every line of code she wrote was something she was laying at his memory. She graduated top of her class. And then quietly, without fanfare, using the small inheritance her father left her, she began to build. She was not a flashy entrepreneur. She was not the kind of person who appeared on magazine covers or gave TED Talks or posted her net worth on social media. She worked in the background, the way her father had, the way people who are truly good at something often do. She licensed a piece of software she developed at 23 to a mid-sized logistics company. She invested that money. She developed another tool, an adaptive data management system that, at the time, most people in the industry hadn't even imagined it, and she licensed it again, this time to a company that was just beginning to grow into something significant. That company was called Sterling Dynamics, but we'll come back to that. She met Daniel Harrington at a charity fundraiser. When she was 26, he was 31, handsome in that old money way that looks effortless because it's been carefully constructed over a lifetime. And he had the kind of easy confidence that came from never having had to doubt himself. He was the VP of Business Development at Sterling Dynamics, a position he had earned partly through talent and partly through the fact that his family name carried weight in financial circles. He saw Maya across the room and was immediately drawn to her. Later, he would tell people it was her beauty. But in the early days, it was something else. Something he couldn't quite name. There was a stillness to her, an intelligence in her eyes. A way she held herself that suggested depths he hadn't encountered before. They dated for 8 months. He proposed on a rooftop at sunset with a ring that was objectively beautiful and an expression that was, in that moment, completely sincere. Maya said yes. She loved him. She believed in him. She believed in what they could be together. She made one decision at the start of their relationship that would define everything that came after. She chose not to tell him the full extent of her financial situation. Not because she was hiding it maliciously, but because she had watched what money did to people, to relationships, to the way men looked at women when they discovered their bank accounts. Her father had warned her. A woman with wealth, he once said, before she had any, is often loved for the wrong reasons by the wrong people. She wanted to be loved for Maya, just Maya, so she kept her professional life quiet, continued working under a corporate structure that kept her name largely invisible, and let Daniel believe she was a moderately successful software consultant. Comfortable, unremarkable. She had intended to tell him the truth before they got married. She planned to, but the engagement moved quickly. Daniel's mother Margaret swept into the planning process like a hurricane in pearls, and somewhere in the blur of venue bookings and dress fittings and Harrington family dinners where Maya never quite felt welcome, the moment passed. And then they were married, and it felt too late. And then they were trying for a baby, and it felt dangerous. And then she was pregnant, and the world changed again. The pregnancy should have been a joy. It was, in many ways, a profound and private joy, just between Maya and the daughter growing inside her. But everything around it, everything in the marriage, had been quietly disintegrating for longer than Maya wanted to admit. The first sign had been subtle. Shortly after their first anniversary, Daniel had begun spending more time at the office. Later nights, shorter explanations. A shift in the way he touched her, less tenderness, more performance. She had chalked it up to work stress. The company was in a major growth phase, and Daniel was under pressure to deliver results. She understood pressure. She gave him space. She was patient. The second sign had come 6 months into her pregnancy, when she overheard a phone call she was not meant to hear. She had come downstairs for a glass of water at 2 a.m, and Daniel was in the kitchen, his voice low and warm in a way it had stopped being with her. He was talking to someone, laughing softly, using words that carved something open in her chest. She backed away before he saw her. She lay awake until morning, staring at the ceiling with her hand on her belly, trying to decide what she knew, and what she could prove and what she was willing to do with either. The third sign was Sarah Whitmore. Sarah had joined Sterling Dynamics 8 months ago as Daniel's executive assistant. She was 24, polished, ambitious, and entirely too comfortable in the way she deferred to Daniel in the office while somehow conveying that the deference was mutual, that it ran both ways, that there was a language between them that no one else could hear. Maya had met her twice and felt the particular coldness of a woman who knows something you don't shit. She had not confronted Daniel. Not yet. Not because she was afraid. Maya Chen was not afraid, but because she was 8 months pregnant. because her daughter needed to be born into as much stability as possible. And because Maya had spent 2 years watching Daniel operate in high-pressure environments, and she knew that a cornered Daniel was a dangerous Daniel. He would deflect, he would attack, he would humiliate. As it turned out, he was going to humiliate her anyway. She just hadn't expected him to do it in front of 300 people. In the weeks leading up to the gala, Daniel had made it quietly but persistently clear that he didn't want Maya to attend. The excuses had changed. Each time she brought it up, it would be a long night, and she needed her rest. The venue wasn't accessible. It wasn't the kind of event for someone in her condition. She wouldn't know anyone there. She'd be bored. Each excuse landed like a small stone, and Maya caught them all and set them aside, and she smiled and nodded and said, "Of course, you're right. I understand." But she had RSVP'd for herself. 3 weeks before the event. Quietly. Without telling him. Not because she wanted to cause a scene, not yet, but because something inside her, something that had been building slowly and quietly the way fires do before they reach the material that will finally make them. Byrne told her she needed to be in that room specifically, on that night specifically, for reasons she couldn't fully articulate but felt in her bones, and so she had arranged for her best friend Lily to drop her off. She had worn the navy gown that her late father would have loved. She had done her hair, put on lipstick, and walked into that ballroom, looking like what she was, a woman who had survived 2 years of quiet erosion, and was still, somehow, entirely intact. Daniel had seen her the moment she walked in. She watched the sequence of emotions move across his face in rapid succession: shock, irritation, something that looked almost like fear, before he settled into the tight-jawed smile she knew so well. He had crossed the room, gripped her arm just above the elbow, leaned close, and said very quietly and very clearly, "What are you doing here?" "I was invited," she said. "I told you not to come, and I came anyway," she said. "I'm your wife." Aloud, he released her arm. He looked at her for a long moment with an expression she could not fully read, something cold and calculating, and then he turned and walked back toward the bar without another word. That had been 40 minutes. And then he had said what he said, in front of everyone. About her looking like she swallowed a watermelon, about her not being the image he needed to project. And the room had laughed, and Maya had stood there, a hand on her belly, smiling, her arm a smile. And she had not moved. She had not cried. She had not made a scene. She had simply existed in that humiliation with a dignity that, in retrospect, the people in that room would remember for the rest of their lives. What she didn't know, what she couldn't see from where she was standing, was that across the ballroom, near the double doors that led to the executive suites, a man had gone very, very still. His name was Victor Sterling. He was 62 years old. He had white hair and the posture of a man who had carried enormous weight for a very long time and was completely at peace with it. He was the founder, chairman, and chief executive officer of Sterling Dynamics, the company that Daniel worked for. The company that had made him rich and comfortable and confident in his cruelty. Victor Sterling had heard exactly what Daniel said, and he recognized Maya. Victor Sterling had built his company from nothing, and he was the first to admit that he had not done it alone. 22 years of building, of pivoting, of recovering from near bankruptcy twice. None of it would have been possible without the series of extraordinary people and fortunate decisions that had, at critical moments, saved the company. One of those fortunate decisions had been licensing a piece of software. 7 years ago from a company called Chunlogic LLC, the software was an adaptive data management and predictive analytics system that had, in blunt terms, revolutionized the way Sterling Dynamics processed its client data. It had increased operational efficiency by 38% in the first year. It had directly contributed to 3 major contracts that tripled the company's revenue over the following 4 years. The woman behind Chunlogic LLC, the developer, the engineer, the quiet genius who had built the system from the ground up, had insisted on anonymity as a condition of the licensing agreement. Richter had honored that request. He was a man of his word, but he knew who she was. Her name was Maya Chen, and she was standing in the middle of his ballroom in a navy dress, 8 months pregnant, with tears she was refusing to shed shining in her eyes, while a man who worked for her, indirectly, whether he knew it or not, told a crowd of laughing strangers that she was an embarrassment. Victor Sterling set down his glass of water very carefully. He straightened his jacket, and he began to walk across the room. The murmur started. Before most people knew what was happening, those nearest the entrance to the executive wing noticed first. The way the crowd parted instinctively for Victor Sterling when he moved. The way conversations died and heads turned, because in this room, his presence commanded something beyond ordinary respect. People didn't just make way for Victor Sterling. They stopped. They watched. They paid attention. He was walking with purpose. Not toward the stage, not toward the bar, not toward any of the usual focal points of a gala evening. He was walking directly across the center of the ballroom floor, and the trajectory of his path was unmistakable to anyone watching closely enough. He was walking toward Maya. Daniel noticed him first among the group at the bar, because Daniel always tracked Victor Sterling in any room they shared. It was the professional reflex of a man who understood where power lived and kept one eye on it at all times. He saw Victor moving, noted the direction, felt a ripple of confusion, and then realized, with a slow, dawning horror that he would later describe to no one because there were no words for it, exactly where Victor was headed. The crowd around Daniel had gone quiet. Sarah's hand slipped from his arm. Someone put down a champagne glass. Victor Sterling crossed the last few feet of open floor and stopped directly in front of Maya Chen. He was a tall man. He looked at her with an expression that was warm and serious at the same time, and then, in front of every single person in that ballroom, in front of the cameras that several journalists and social media managers were suddenly scrambling to aim in his direction, Victor Sterling bowed. Not a perfunctory nod, not a slight inclination of the head, a full, genuine, deep bow, the kind that carries the weight of real respect, the kind that means something. Maya stared at him. The room had gone absolutely silent. Victor straightened up and smiled at her, and it was a smile she recognized, because she had met him 3 times before in a very different context. In a small conference room with no cameras and no audience, where she had sat across from him and discussed data architecture and contract terms and the future of his company. "Ms. Chun," he said, and his voice carried through that silent room with the ease of a man who had spent 60 years saying important things. "I'm deeply glad you're here tonight. I've been hoping for an opportunity to thank you properly." Paused, and she could see in his eyes that he understood exactly what had just happened in this room, that he had heard every word. "I don't believe I've ever adequately expressed what your work has meant to this company." To all of us, Maya's hand was still resting on her belly. She felt her daughter move a soft, rolling shift, as if the baby sensed that something enormous was unfolding around her. "Victor," Maya said, and her voice was completely steady. "It's good to see you." He offered his arm. "Would you do me the honor of sitting with me for a few minutes? There are some people I'd like to introduce you to." She took his arm. And Daniel Harrington watched his wife, his heavily pregnant wife, whom he had just publicly mocked in front of 300 people, walk away on the arm of the most powerful man in the room, while the crowd that had been laughing 30 seconds ago stood in a silence so complete you could have heard a champagne bubble rise. What happened next unfolded over the following 40 minutes, like a slow-motion revelation, and it was witnessed by everyone in that ballroom. Victor sat with Maya at a table near the center of the room and spoke to her with the kind of focused attention he gave to board members and major shareholders. He introduced her to people, significant people, names that everyone in that room recognized, and in each introduction he said some version of the same thing. "This is Maya Chen. She built the analytics architecture that's been at the core of our operations for 7 years. We would not be the company we are today without her." He said it simply, without drama. The way people state things that are just true. The introductions moved through the room like a current. Board members, chief technology officers, venture capitalists who had invested in Sterling Dynamics and understood, suddenly, something about the source of their returns that they hadn't known before. Journalists who had been covering the gala for their technology columns and were now quietly rearranging the stories they had planned to write. Maya sat through it all with that same stillness, that deep, profound stillness that had always been the truest thing about her, and she spoke when spoken to, and she was warm and intelligent and entirely herself, and every person who sat across from her that evening came away thinking the same thing. Who is this woman? How did I not know about her? Daniel had not moved from his place near the bar. He stood there like a man watching a building fall, understanding what was happening but unable to process it fast enough to do anything about it. Sarah had disappeared at some point. He was dimly aware of that, the way you're dimly aware of peripheral things when the central thing is catastrophic. His colleague Marcus elbowed him. "Did you know?" Marcus asked, his voice low and strange. "About your wife. Did you know who she was?" Daniel said nothing. Because apparently she's the reason we all have jobs, Marcus said. There was no humor in it. Daniel had always believed that he was the important one. This was not something he would have said out loud, because he was intelligent enough to know how it sounded, but it was the architecture of his self-image, and it had been for as long as he could remember. He was a Harrington whose family had money and connections and a name that opened doors. He had built a career at one of the city's most prestigious tech firms. He earned a substantial salary, drove a car that impressed people, wore suits that were worth more than some families' monthly grocery budgets. Maya, by contrast, Maya was a software consultant, moderate income, no famous family, no impressive lineage. He had introduced her at functions as my wife in a tone that communicated the gap he perceived between them. And he had done it so naturally, for so long, that he had stopped even noticing. He was doing it. He had not noticed. Because he had not truly looked at Maya in a very long time. He had taken the lifestyle they shared, the house, the vacations, the comfortable cushion that seemed always to be there beneath the ordinary pressures of life, and attributed it to his own earnings, his own success, his own management of their finances. He had not asked too many questions. He had not needed to. He was a Harrington, of course. Things were comfortable. That was simply how his life worked. But standing in that ballroom now, watching his wife talk to Victor Sterling with the ease of someone who knew the CEO of a $2 billion company personally, watching board members lean toward her with genuine interest, watching Victor laugh at something she said, something cold was beginning to move through Daniel's understanding. He pulled out his phone. He searched for ChunLogic LLC. The results that came up were sparse, deliberately so. But there was enough. A legal filing here, a licensing agreement summary there, a brief mention in a 7-year-old Sterling Dynamics annual report of a proprietary analytics partnership that had been, in the polite language of corporate documents, enormously consequential for the company's growth trajectory. He searched for Maya Chen, software developer, a few academic papers, a conference abstract from years ago, and one article tucked in a trade publication that covered enterprise software from 8 years back, about a young developer named Maya Chen whose adaptive data architecture had been quietly licensed to several major firms before she stepped back from the public-facing side of her business to pursue other interests. Daniel stared at his phone for a long time. He thought about the house they lived in, the house he believed he had primarily paid for. He thought about the investment accounts he had never asked Maya directly about, assuming they were modest. He thought about the way Maya never stressed about money, never pushed back when he made financial decisions, never seemed anxious in the way that people with limited resources always eventually became anxious. He had interpreted that calm as passivity, as lack of ambition. It had been the opposite of passivity. He put his phone in his pocket. He looked across the room at his wife, sitting at a table surrounded by the most powerful people in the building, laughing softly at something the CFO of Sterling Dynamics had just said. For the first time in 2 years, Daniel Harrington was afraid. The Gala continued around him, but for Maya, something had quietly and irrevocably shifted. She could feel it, not in a triumphant way, not yet, because the emotion she felt most strongly in that moment was something sadder and more complex than triumph. It was the particular grief of a woman who realizes that the performance she has been maintaining for 2 years has finally, publicly, proven to be unnecessary. She had been hiding herself to protect her marriage. She had been making herself smaller to keep Daniel comfortable, and he had mocked her anyway. He had mocked her in front of everyone anyway. Victor leaned over at one point, during a lull in the introductions, and said quietly, "I owe you an apology for not intervening sooner." I heard what he said. "You don't owe me anything," Maya said. "I disagree," Victor said. He looked at her steadily. "A person who does what you have done, who builds what you have built, and asks for nothing in return. No recognition, no fanfare, nothing except the privacy to do good work deserves a great deal more than what's happened to you tonight." Maya looked at her hands in her lap. "I made choices," she said. "You did," he agreed. "And so did he." She looked up at him. "Whatever you decide to do next," Victor said, "I want you to know that this company will stand behind you, completely any support you need, any resource." He paused. "And for what it's worth, your father would have been very proud of you tonight." Maya felt something break carefully, deep inside her chest. Not the armor was still in place. Something else. Something that had been held under enormous pressure for a very long time, and was now just beginning, to release. "You knew my father?" she asked. "I knew of him," Victor said gently. He's in the academic papers you published. You cited him in your methodology section. I read everything you've ever published. He smiled. You raised someone extraordinary. Maya pressed her lips together and nodded once and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Maya." Margaret Harrington had been watching from a table near the wall, and if Maya had looked carefully, she might have noticed the way the older woman's expression changed across the course of the evening. The slow, visible recalculation happening behind those sharp eyes. Margaret was 70 years old and had spent the majority of those years carefully managing the Harrington reputation, the Harrington money, the Harrington image. She had never liked Maya, had never pretended to. Maya was not from the right family, did not have the right background, had not gone to the right schools. She was quiet in ways that Margaret found suspicious and ordinary in ways that Margaret found offensive. She had told Daniel, privately, on several occasions, that he could have done better. Now she was watching Maya Chen sit beside Victor Sterling, while the people Marguerite had spent decades cultivating for social currency deferred to Maya, as if she were the most important person in the room. Marguerite picked up her evening bag. She looked at her son across the room standing frozen by the bar with a face like a man watching his own funeral, and she felt something she almost never felt. She felt that she might have been wrong. She didn't act on it that night. That was not who Margaret was. But the seed was planted, and it would grow. Daniel approached Maya just before 10 o'clock. The crowd had thinned slightly, people drifting out, conversations beginning to wrap up, and for the first time since she had arrived, Maya was standing alone near the windows, looking out at the city lights below. She heard him coming. She always heard him coming, had learned, over 2 years, to track him in a room the way prey tracks a predator. She turned to face him before he reached her. He looked, and she noted this with a kind of detached interest, genuinely shaken. The composure was still there, the surface. But beneath it there was something stripped and raw that she had not seen on his face before. "We need to talk," he said. "We do," she agreed. "But not tonight, Maya, not tonight." Danielle, her voice was quiet and entirely final. "Tonight I am going to go home, and I am going to take care of myself, and I am going to think about our daughter, and I am not going to have a conversation that I am not in the right emotional state to have." She looked at him for a long moment. "Do you understand?" He studied her, trying to find, she knew, some lever to press, some way to reframe what was happening, some angle from which he could reclaim control. That was Daniel's reflex. That was always Daniel's reflex. "I didn't mean he started. I know what you meant," she said. She picked up her clutch from the chair beside her. "I'll see you at home," as she walked out of that ballroom with her head high and her hand on her belly and 300 people watching, and nobody laughed. The drive home was long. Lily was waiting outside with the car, as arranged, and the moment Maya got in and closed the door, she let out a breath as she felt like she had been holding for months, maybe years. "How was it?" Lily asked, reading Maya's face immediately the way she always could. "Interesting," Maya said. Lily raised one eyebrow. She was 29, fiercely loyal, worked in family law, and had been telling Maya for 8 months that she needed to talk to a lawyer. Interesting, like how Maya looked out the window at the city moving past. "He humiliated me in front of 300 people, she said. Her voice was calm and factual. "He said I looked like I swallowed a watermelon and that I wasn't the image he needed to project." The silence in the car was volcanic. "Maya," Lily said, very carefully. "Victor Sterling bowed to me in front of everyone," Maya said, "and spent 40 minutes introducing me to the entire board as the woman whose work built the company's core analytics platform." Another silence. Different quality. "He," Lily started. "He knows who I am," Maya said. "He's always known." She paused. "I should have told Daniel years ago. I know that. I made a mistake, keeping it from him. I know that." She pressed her hand flat against her belly. "But knowing that I made a mistake doesn't mean I deserve what he's been doing to me." "No," Lily said firmly. "It absolutely does not." "I need you to call your colleague in the morning," Maya said. "The family lawyer, the one you trust." She turned to look at Lily. "I need to know my options." Lily nodded. Her expression was one of someone who has been waiting for this moment, and is deeply relieved it has finally come. "I'll call her first thing." "Thank you," Maya said. She looked back at the window. Outside, the city glittered. Somewhere in that glitter was a ballroom where people were still talking about what they had witnessed tonight. She knew that. News traveled fast in circles like that. By morning, some version of the story would have moved through enough phones, and social networks have achieved a kind of permanence. She didn't care about that, not really. She cared about something smaller and larger at the same time, the daughter moving gently beneath her hand, the life she was going to build, the version of herself she was going to become on the other side of all this. Her father had called her little bird. She thought maybe it was time to fly. Daniel came home at midnight. Maya was sitting in the chair by the window in their bedroom when he came in, a glass of water on the table beside her, lamp casting a warm circle of light around her. She was not reading. She was simply sitting, in that way of hers, that profound and slightly unnerving stillness that had always made him feel, if he was honest, slightly off balance. He stood in the doorway. His jacket was over his arm. He looked like a man who had aged several years in 4 hours. I need to explain, he said. You don't, Maya said. Not tonight. I was drunk. I was trying to be funny. You were trying to manage how people perceived you, Maya said, by diminishing how they perceived me. You've been doing that for a long time. Tonight you just did it loudly. He opened his mouth, he closed it. And I did. Also know about Sarah, Maya said. The air in the room changed. Maya, I don't want to hear it tonight, she said. I'm 8 months pregnant. I've been on my feet for 4 hours. I'm going to sleep, because my daughter needs me to be rested. She looked at him across the lamplit room with an expression that was, somehow, simultaneously heartbroken and completely fearless. But tomorrow, Daniel, we are going to have a very honest conversation about all of it. He was quiet for a long moment. Are you leaving me? He asked, and it was the first genuinely vulnerable thing she had heard him say in so long that it almost moved her. I'm going to sleep, she said. Good night, Daniel. He left the room. She heard him go to the guest room and close the door quietly, and the quietness of it felt like an acknowledgement finally, after so long of what he had done. Maya put her hand on her belly and felt her daughter move against her palm in that soft, rolling way that always made her think of the ocean. We're going to be alright, sweetheart, she whispered. I promise you. We're going to be completely alright. The conversation the next morning lasted 3 hours. Maya had slept better than she had in months, deep and dreamless, as if her body had finally been given permission to rest. She woke before Daniel, showered, dressed, made herself breakfast, with the careful deliberateness of someone preparing for something important. She ate standing at the kitchen counter, looking out at the garden, thinking about her father, thinking about code and systems and the way the best solutions were always built on clean, honest foundations, thinking about what she was about to dismantle and what she was going to build in its place. When Daniel came downstairs, she was ready. She laid it out without anger and without apology. She was not cruel, because cruelty was not in her nature, but she was completely, almost surgically honest. She told him what she knew about Sarah. She told him what she had overheard 8 months ago. She told him about the quiet accumulation of humiliations, the dismissals at dinner parties, the introductions that left her unnamed, the ways he had made her feel, slowly and persistently, like a burden he was carrying rather than a partner he had chosen. And then she told him the truth about herself. She told him about her work, about Chandler, about the licensing agreements and the investments and the quietly assembled financial architecture that had been operating, largely invisibly, beneath the surface of their shared life. She told him that the house was fully in her name, had been from the beginning, because she had purchased it outright before they married, before he even knew about her finances, and had added him to the deed as a gesture of partnership that she now recognized he had never quite earned. She told him that the investment accounts he managed, the ones he thought of as joint assets that he oversaw, contained her money, her work, her father's legacy, and her own decade of disciplined, focused effort. She told him all of it, calmly, while he sat across the kitchen table and turned the color of old chalk. How much? He said finally. That's not the right question, she said. How much, Maya? She told him. The silence that followed was very long. Your worth, he started. My work has generated that. Yes, she said. Over 10 years. With significant help from my father's foundation and a great deal of careful investment. But then why did you let me think? Because I wanted to be loved for who I was, she said. Not what I had. She looked at him steadily. And you loved me for a while, Daniel, I believe that. I don't think it was fake in the beginning. But at some point you stopped seeing me and started seeing a version of me that you found convenient. And I let you. I stayed quiet and I stayed small and I let you chip away at me for 2 years because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. She paused. I shouldn't have done that. That was my mistake. But it's a mistake I'm done making. He put his head in his hands. What happens now, he said. Now, Maya said, I'm going to have our daughter, and after she's born, and after I've recovered, I'm going to talk to a lawyer, and we're going to end this marriage with as much dignity as possible. She kept her voice even. I don't want a war. Daniel, I don't want to destroy you. That's not who I am. But I want honesty, I want fairness, and I want what's best for our daughter. If you can commit to those things, this can be a decent process. If you can't, she'll let the sentence rest unfinished, because they both understood the weight of what she wasn't saying. He looked up at her. His eyes were red. I'm sorry, he said. For last night. For he stopped. For all of it. I know, she said. I believe you, but it doesn't change anything. No, she said quietly. It doesn't change anything. The story of what had happened at the Sterling Dynamics Gala did not stay quiet. These things never do. Not in a city where power and gossip travel in the same circles. And not when the incident had been witnessed by journalists, photographed by 3 different phone cameras, and discussed in hushed, animated tones at every breakfast meeting that followed. By the second day, a social media post from an attendee who went by the handle Tech Insider City had described the scene in enough detail to make it unmistakable. AVP at Sterling Dynamics had publicly mocked his pregnant wife at the company's annual gala, and the company's CEO had subsequently bowed to her in front of the entire room, introducing her as the woman behind the technology that built the company's foundation. The post had been shared thousands of times. Victor Sterling said nothing publicly. He didn't need to. The bow had said everything. Daniel's position at the company became untenable almost immediately. His direct supervisor called him in on Monday morning for what was described as a conversation about professional conduct at company events. The conversation was brief and not kind. By Wednesday, a mutual agreement had been reached that resulted in Daniel's resignation, effective immediately, with a severance package that was notably modest for someone of his tenure, a fact that would be widely noticed by those who tracked these things. Sarah Whitmore had already put in her own notice, which made a particular kind of sense to everyone who knew anything. Margaret Harrington called Maya for the first time ever on Thursday morning. The conversation was short and strained and not exactly an apology. Margaret was constitutionally incapable of apology, but it was the closest she had ever come to one. She said that she had not known about Maya's work, that she might have misjudged the situation, that she hoped, for the child's sake, that things could be handled civilly. They will be, Maya said. On my end, they absolutely will be. Lily's colleague, the family lawyer, was a quiet and devastating woman named Rachel Park, who had been practicing for 20 years and had never once lost a case she believed in. She and Maya met for 2 hours, and at the end of it, Rachel said, "You're in an excellent position. More than excellent." She paused. "Do you want to go after him?" "I want what's fair," Maya said. "For me and for my daughter." Rachel nodded. "But I can absolutely get you." 23 days after the gala, at 4:17 in the morning, Maya Chen's daughter was born. She arrived with a healthy, furious cry that filled the delivery room and made the midwife laugh and made Lily, who was holding Maya's hand, burst into tears. She was 7 pounds and 2 ounces, and she had Maya's dark hair and, somehow, already, Maya's watchful eyes, that quality of focused attention that seemed to suggest she was already taking notes. Maya held her daughter against her chest in the quiet aftermath of the delivery and felt the full, enormous weight of the moment, the grief and the love and the future all arriving at once, layered over each other like the strata of something geological. She had sent Daniel a message. When labor began, he had arrived at the hospital and waited in the hallway and was allowed in, briefly, to see the baby. He held his daughter for 11 minutes in a chair by the window, and Maya watched his face while he held her, watched the way something complicated and irreversible moved through him, and she felt the sadness of it without letting it change anything. He handed the baby back carefully, as if she were the most precious thing he had ever touched. Because she was... "What's her name?" he asked. Maya had decided weeks ago. She looked at her daughter, at the small, perfect, fighting face of the person who had been her reason throughout all of it. "Jade," she said. "Jade Lynn Chen, not Harrington." Chen. Daniel nodded slowly. He understood. "It's a beautiful name," he said. "It was my father's mother's name." Maya said. He stood up and straightened his jacket and looked at Maya for a long moment with an expression she had never quite seen on his face before. It might have been remorse, genuine and too late. the kind that comes when the full accounting finally arrives. I threw away something extraordinary, he said. Yes, Maya said. You did. He left quietly, and Maya turned back to her daughter. And Lily was there, and the morning was coming through the window in long, soft strips of gold, and Jade Lin Chun opened her eyes, those watchful, intelligent, extraordinary eyes, and looked at her mother. And Maya smiled. Not the armor smiled. Not the armor smile. Not the performance, the real one, the one that had been waiting, quietly, beneath everything else, all this time. In the months that followed, Maya moved with the particular focus of someone who knows exactly what they are building and why. She settled into a smaller, warmer house, one she had owned under a holding company for 3 years, a fact that had been among several revelations Rachel Park had deployed, with quiet precision, during the divorce proceedings. It had a garden, which Maya had always wanted and never had in the Harrington house. And she planted things slowly through the spring, with Jade in a carrier against her chest and dirt under her fingernails, and the sensation of something long, compressed finally beginning to expand. Or the divorce settlement was, as Rachel had promised, fair, comprehensive. Maya did not strip Daniel of everything, because she had meant it when she said she didn't want a war. He received what he was entitled to and nothing more, and it was significantly less than he had apparently been expecting, a fact it revealed, more clearly than anything else could, that he had believed the significant assets in their marriage were primarily his. The conversation with his lawyer, by all accounts, was deeply sobering. He was required to pay child support at a level commensurate with both their incomes, and the income figure the court worked from for Maya's side was one that made his lawyer go very quiet and ask, carefully, if there had been a misprint. There had not been a misprint, Daniel. Harrington spent 6 months looking for a new position in the industry before accepting that his name, which had opened so many doors before, was now attached to a story that traveled ahead of him wherever he went. Not because Maya had said anything, she had said nothing, publicly. She had answered no journalists, given no interviews, declined every invitation to tell her side of the story. She didn't need to. Victor Sterling's bow had told the story that needed telling, and everyone who mattered had heard it. He eventually found work at a smaller firm in another city, a modest position, a fresh start. Maya wished him no harm from it. She genuinely didn't. She simply wished him somewhere far away from her, where she did not have to account for him in the architecture of the life she was building. Sterling Dynamics announced, in the spring of the year that Jade turned 1, a new initiative called the Chunlogic Partnership, a formal, publicly recognized collaboration between the company and Maya's firm that would fund and develop a new generation of data management tools. The announcement listed Maya Chen as the lead architect and acknowledged her not, for the first time in the company's public communications, the foundational role that her original software had played in its growth. The technology press covered it extensively. Several profiles were written. Maya declined most interviews, but she allowed one, a long, thoughtful conversation with a writer she liked, and in it, she talked about her father and about the work and about what it meant to build something lasting. She did not talk about Daniel McKay. She did not talk about the Gala. When the writer asked, gently, about the personal difficulties of the past year, Maya said simply, the most important thing I did last year was have my daughter. Everything else was context. The profile ran with a photograph that Maya had approved, just her and Jade, outside in the garden, Jade on her hip with her watchful eyes squinting in the spring light. It was not a glamorous photograph. It was just a woman and her daughter in a garden with dirt under their fingernails. It was the most shared image in the publication's history that year. Jade's first words spoken at 11 months, with a focus and clarity that made Lily literally fall off the couch, was Bert. Maya was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop, the morning sun coming through the window, a mug of coffee cooling beside her, when Jade, sitting on the floor with a pile of soft toys, looked up at her, with those extraordinary eyes and said, with absolute certainty, Bird. Maya froze. What did you say, baby? She whispered. Jade looked at her. Bird, she said again, and Maya put her hands over her face and laughed and cried at the same time, not quietly, not with any dignity at all, but fully and freely and with her whole body, while Jade looked on with the expression of someone who has said an important thing and is waiting to see what happens next. Little Bird. Her father's name for her, the name that had carried her through everything that she had passed it on without knowing she was going to. A year and a half after the night of the gala, Maya received a message from a young woman who had been at the event. She was 22, an intern at one of the financial firms that had attended. She wrote to say that she had been standing nearby when Daniel made his comment, and that she had wanted to say something and hadn't, and that she had carried the guilt of her silence for 18 months. She had watched what happened after Victor's bow, the way the room shifted, Maya's exit, and it had changed something in how she thought about herself and what she was willing to tolerate in her own life. She wrote, "I wanted to tell you that watching you walk out of that room with your head up was the bravest thing I have ever seen in person. I want to be like that." Maya read the message twice. Then she wrote back. She wrote, "The bravest thing I did that night was not how I walked out. It was every single day before that night when I stayed quiet, and stayed small, and chose not to fight yet, not because I was weak, but because I was choosing the right moment and protecting the things that mattered most. And then when the moment came, I didn't have to do anything except be myself. The bravery was in the waiting, but the real bravery, the kind I hope you practice every day, is smaller than that. It's in knowing your own worth quietly, every morning, when nobody is watching, before you've done anything impressive. It's in never performing that worth for someone who doesn't deserve to see it. You are worth something extraordinary, even in the moments when the room is empty and no one is bowing. Don't forget that." The young woman saved the message. She would keep it for the rest of her life. The night of the gala had been many things: a humiliation, an exposure, a reckoning, but mostly looking back, from the distance of years and perspective, it had been a beginning. The beginning of the life Maya had been quietly, carefully, stubbornly building toward through all the difficult years. A life her father had believed she would build when he sat beside her at the kitchen table and taught her to see patterns in chaos, to build solutions from nothing but logic and will. She thought about him often, especially in the evenings, when Jade was asleep and the garden was dark outside. The window in the house was quiet, with the particular quality of peace that is earned rather than given. She would sit at the kitchen table, the same table she had worked at since she moved in, the same chair, the same lamp, and she would think about James Chun and his dry erase markers and his coffee and his voice, telling her that the only people who matter are the ones who try to fix things. Had fixed things, not perfectly, not without scars, but thoroughly, and honestly, and on her own terms. And Jade, sleeping in the room down the hall, would wake in the morning with her watchful eyes and her one-word vocabulary that was slowly, daily, becoming her language, would wake full of her own particular fierce aliveness. And Maya would carry her into the kitchen, and the morning light would come through the window, and they would start another day of building, another day of being exactly, fully, unapologetically who they were. There is a version of this story that ends with Daniel on his knees, that ends with public destruction and spectacular revenge and every humiliation repaid with interest. There are people who, hearing this story, want that ending, who feel that anything less is insufficient justice. But Maya Chen never wanted that story. What she wanted, what she had always wanted, from the beginning, before everything became complicated, was simply to be seen, to be known, and to have the work she had quietly devoted herself to recognized for what it was, and to have the daughter she was carrying recognized as the precious, miraculous, worthy person she was becoming, on a night in a ballroom, in front of 300 people. A man who knew her worth had bowed, and in that bow was everything that Daniel Harrington, for all his money and his name, and his calculated confidence, had never been able to give her. Respect. Simple, genuine, full respect. She hadn't needed it from a room full of strangers. She hadn't needed the validation or the story or the narrative justice of it all. But she had needed somewhere, for herself, for her father's memory, for the daughter who was listening even then from inside her, to know that her worth was real, that the years of quiet building had meant something, that she was not, had never been, what Daniel tried to make her in that moment. And now she knew, and Jade would know. Not from being told, not from a story, though she would eventually hear this one when she was old enough to carry it, but from watching her mother work, from watching her mother plant things in the garden and build things in the code and treat every person who crossed her path with the same careful dignity she extended to herself. From watching the way Maya moved through the world, not loudly, not dramatically, not with any need to be the most impressive person in any room, but with the particular grace of someone who has found, after great difficulty, the exact shape of who they are, and decided it is enough, more than enough. It was, in fact, extraordinary. And the morning after the gala, and every morning after that, Maya Chen woke up and knew it, and that finally, completely, forever was enough.